Hi everybody, welcome to our last tutorial. This is called Other Forensic Investigations, a tutorial. It covers just kind of just a little stuff that we didn't want to do a whole unit on. The objective is going to be that we're going to explain forensic science in relation to different types of crimes. We're going to talk about things like arson. We're going to talk about things like fingerprint analysis. We're going to talk about things like cyber crimes and yep, hold on. Cyber crimes or even bank crimes, money crimes. All right, forensic science investigation of arson. You guys know what arson is. It's when you burn down something that's not yours or you burn down something illegally. Arson is an interesting thing because often people have a building or something that is expensive that is not making them the money that they want to make. They can't sell it because it's not worth, on the market it's not worth it. And so a lot of times the best way to deal with it is to burn it down. That's what they think, and that's called arson. It is highly illegal. There are also people who are, they call them firebugs or pyromaniacs or something like that. These are people who like to just watch stuff burn. So if you start a fire in the woods or start a fire in a building or even start a fire in a dumpster, really, just to watch it burn or in some malicious way, that's called arson. All right. Typically, the first people to arrive at the arson scene are the first responders. Then the arson investigators show up. The first responders, of course, they're the public safety officers like the firemen or something, and they deal with the threat. They put out the fire. Sadly, that could, if they're not careful, destroy some evidence. So a lot of times firefighters are asked to be very careful in the way they put out certain fires. But also arson investigators are very good at pulling out evidence even after the firefighters have been there. So there's just some steps they follow. First of all, if you're an arson investigator and you've arrived at a scene, the fire's already out, but then you still have to think about your safety because I mean, look at this scene. This building has been compromised. It could fall. If you lean on the wrong post, the whole thing could fall. There's going to be nails sticking up out of the ground. There may be fumes that you are breathing that are not healthy, and so your safety first, right? And you can see they're wearing a suit that will protect them. Then they go in and they just observe. They just look around, take some pictures. They maybe look for vehicles leaving the scene because sometimes they're there as the fire is being put out. They might talk to the inhabitants of the building, note what they're carrying. They may take the structure, weather conditions, what type of fire suppression methods were used by the fire department, and it helps them with their analysis. Then the next three steps are the next step is preservation. Then what they're going to do is they're going to go there and do what other things have been done at what we talked about at other types of crime scenes. They're going to look for trace evidence, broken glass, prints of shoes or other types of prints, maybe a handprint. You don't find much in terms of fingerprints, but you might find a gas can outside of the burned area, and you may say, oh, I can get a fingerprint off of that. A lot of times, these things are destroyed by the fire suppression. The first thing to do is put out the fire. And so the fire department is not going to compromise their safety just to preserve evidence. But, it's a good arson investigator can look past all that. Next, first responders are there to secure the scene, so they secure it. They limit access to anybody going in and out. As soon as the fire is put out, they rope off the area, and you don't go in there unless you got a good reason, and then they coordinate. The arson investigator coordinates with efforts of all involved in the investigation. Some investigators may require collaboration between several agencies. They might look to the DEA if it was like a meth house or something that exploded. They may work with other agencies and set up a command post depending on how big the fire was. There's lots that goes on here, and it's a very interesting thing. Watched a movie years ago called Backdraft that I thought was just one of the best movies ever made, and one of the main characters was an arson investigator, and it's really interesting how the conclusions you can draw from very little evidence. Some of the more common types of crimes today involve computers, and so as you are a crime scene investigator, you might specialize in computers, but you're going to have a skill at pulling information from computers. Computer forensics is the process of collecting and analyzing digital information so it can be used in a court of law. Computer forensics is made especially valuable in gathering and analyzing evidence involving computer crimes. I just read that, but you know. So a computer forensics specialist is going to have to be able to deal with a computer or other types of technology that stores data or has access to the internet. It can include things like disks, hard drives, tapes. I know you guys are young, you don't believe that, but we used to use tapes, and tapes are still used today in certain situations. SIM cards, USB drives, and so on. And they do the following tasks. First of all, they can protect the computer system from damage. Quite often that means unplugging it, shutting it down, and in other ways kind of digitally freezing it. And so that one of the reasons you shut down any Wi-Fi or any type of internet access is so people from the outside can't remotely wipe the computer. One of the things that they were telling me when I did the interview the other day at the CSI lab in Okeechobee was that they put phones and laptops in what we call Faraday cages, and these Faraday cages block out all RF radio waves, so that includes Wi-Fi and cell phone signal. And so if they have a cell phone, they put it in this bag or in this locker, and it's a Faraday cage. That way you can't tell it to remote wipe if they want to use it for evidence. It's pretty crazy. Then they go into a room. They have a Faraday cage room at Okeechobee County in which they won't turn on the phone until they're safely in that room, so that they can work on it without fear of it being remotely wiped. If it were to connect to the internet, either through the cell network or through a Wi-Fi network, there could have been a command sent from the user who's possibly a criminal, and that command could have said, as soon as you get this signal, wipe the phone. Now, we all have that. You can tell your phone to reset to factory from sending in a signal. You can do it on your phone now. And so if you set it up. So if you're a criminal and you know that the cops have your phone, you might want to try to remote wipe it. They have to take care of that. Then they start recovering the data. It may be hidden, deleted, encrypted, password protected. They have to work very hard at it. There's some very famous things, things lately to where the phone manufacturers, Apple specifically, has had to work with the government about unlocking their phones, and Apple specifically is quite concerned about giving the government an unlock piece of software that will let them unlock any Apple phone. It's kind of an invasion of privacy to them, and as a result this makes things very difficult. And so there was a lot of discussion back and forth between the government and Apple. Now, I don't think Apple's being criminal. I don't think they're being difficult, but they are trying to protect their customers, which have a right to privacy. So until the government proved to them that they were going to be able to protect the privacy of all Apple users, they didn't want to give them a way to unlock Apple phones in this case, and it took a while. All right, laptops, I can encrypt a file on my computer right now fairly easily. It's free or cheap at least, and it would take a person a long time to break the encryption, and that's what computer forensic specialists do, is they figure this stuff out. They have software that lets them do it. It is only available to law enforcement or other types of paramilitary agencies. They then take that data and they analyze it, and they look for things like, especially with a phone, they look for things like a GPS to prove that you were here at this, or at least that phone was at that spot at that particular time. They look for things like incriminating evidence that you kept on your computer, or sadly pictures that you may have on your computer of things that are inappropriate, that are illegal. Then they go give testimony, and they're trained computer forensic scientists, so they can go give expert testimony, and it helps to get a conviction. Okay, you have to have a strong knowledge of both hardware and software, and not just one type of computer. All types of computers, all types of phones, other types of technologies, even things like security companies that have security cameras. You need to be able to go to the computer that runs the security cameras and pull information from there. It's a pretty interesting, pretty crazy type of a thing, but it is very effective. Some things you can do would be some things they have to do as soon as they get there is like unplug or disable the computer device. That instantly unplugs it or disables it. I know that nowadays they carry a bag that's what's called a Faraday bag. It blocks an external transmission. When they can, they make an image or a backup of the hard drive, or the SIM card, or whatever they have. They have special little computers that you can just plug right into the hard drive, and it makes an image. That way, if something happens to the original, they got a copy. Then, of course, they don't mess with the original hard drive. They start looking at the image backup. That way, if they destroy it, no big deal. They've still got the original. Then they analyze the media for physical evidence, such as hair or fingerprints or other types of trace evidence, and then they present an analysis, and that could lead to a conviction. There's lots of challenges. For one thing, the data volume, it's huge. I mean, I routinely store about 10 terabytes of information here at my house. And if you ever needed to investigate me, you'd have to sift through 10 terabytes of information. And it takes a while. If I were to encrypt that, any or all of it, then that adds to a whole nother level of now all this has to be encrypted. And they have to sometimes dig through every single byte. And a terabyte is 1,024 gigabytes. A gigabyte is 1,024 megabytes. So you're looking at millions of megabytes that you have to dig through. And by the way, a megabyte is 1,024 kilobytes, and that's 1,024 bytes. So you're looking at trillions of bytes for every terabyte. And that's a lot of information. They don't do it manually. They have computers and other software to do it for them. But it is a long, drawn-out process, and it can take days, weeks, months, even years. The evidence found in the storage rarely leads directly to a prosecution, but then they have to figure out what it implies to. And a lot of times that evidence is called causality. A lot of times that evidence can then lead to the next thing that they find. Okay, we've already talked about encryption. Do they, how do they, what technology do they use to encrypt it? Is the company going to cooperate, such as Apple? And then finally, jurisdiction. Here you have an American or even a Florida-based investigating team. Suppose that the information was accessed and is actually stored on a cloud in Nebraska. You have to contact Nebraska authorities and say, we need permission to go into this particular hard drive that is sitting inside of your jurisdiction. What if it's out of the country? And in some cases there are countries that don't have a very good agreement with the United States in terms of jurisdiction, and as a result, a lot of people use them for offsite storage of their information, and you can't get it very easily. It's very difficult. Another big thing is financial crimes and forgery, credit card fraud, identity theft. These are big problems, and forensic investigation can be involved in this. Credit card fraud is when you steal somebody's credit card information and then use that to make your own purchases. Companies, credit card companies, banks, they try very hard to protect these things, and they are responsible for the breach in the data. But somebody has to recover this, and I've been the victim of it a couple of times. My bank will call me and say, hey, are you using your card to buy a car not that you could buy a car, are you using your card to buy a pair of shoes in Peoria, Illinois? And I'm like, no, I've never been to Peoria, Illinois. And they say, okay, we're going to shut your card down. But if they don't catch it, if there are people that are a little bit sneakier about it, then you have to investigate it. Identity theft is kind of a larger version of credit card fraud. In fact, credit card fraud falls under identity theft, but there are people who can take your personal information. This is why you never share your social security number, your full number, or your full name, or your mom's maiden name, or things like this with anyone, especially on things like Facebook, where they're very good at, your elf name is the month you were born, your mom's middle name, and you're like, don't give people that stuff, all right? Because this is how they can do things like identity theft. And you have forensic investigators that are able to go in there and work on that. Now, this is hard. It takes a long time, and they're not always successful. But this is how it's done. If there is going to be somebody to investigate that kind of a fraud, it'll be some type of a forensic investigator. Insurance fraud, people who try to cheat the insurance company. Tax evasion. Embezzlement. Embezzlement is if I work for a company and I figure out a way to move some money out of the company's account into my personal account, I've basically stolen. Okay, that's embezzlement. And if you're not careful, hopefully you will get caught, because it's highly illegal. It's inappropriate. You're stealing from someone else. Those are all things that can be investigated by forensic investigators. Financial fraud is when somebody does some of those things we just talked about, and there's a whole bunch of other things. They are swindling their clients out of money. They are stealing from their clients. They're stealing from their employees. They're stealing from groups of people, and the result is that a lot of times, sadly, they get away with it, but it can be caught. And if somebody suspects it, then you can have somebody investigate it for you and hopefully catch it. Bernie Madoff is one of the most famous financial fraudists of all time, and he was able to take a lot of money from a lot of people. Now, he finally went to jail over it, but he ruined lots of people. Lots of people who had built up wealth over their lives lost everything to Bernie Madoff because he committed fraud. And he should go to jail. And the people got some of their money back, but a lot of them didn't. I know people who were wealthy and lost everything because of a guy named by a guy like Bernie Madoff. Forgery is another problem. And imagine if you had some checks in your house and somebody came and stole a check and then took it somewhere and tried to buy something with it and signed your name on the check. The person taking the check may or may not know, and that's a type of forgery. Another one would be things like, imagine you're in a dentist's office or a doctor's office and you can accidentally steal, or not accidentally, if you can steal their little prescription form, and then you fill it out and take it to the pharmacy, and it's got the doctor's letter on it and everything, and you get certain types of controlled drugs. There's all kinds of things, and they fall under three groups. The first one is called trace forgery, and it involves taking an original piece of paper and putting another one on top of it and kind of tracing it. You can trace things like signatures. Then there's simulated or freehand, in which you just look at it and copy it yourself. A lot of people are very good with that. A lifted forgery is when you use like a piece of tape to go over the ink where somebody signed a name. You put the tape on there, and then you carefully pull it back up and you see it, and you can go to a blank sheet of paper and put it back down and just really kind of rub it in, and then you peel that back off, and there's an impression left on the paper where the signature should be, and then you can go back with a pen and kind of fill it in, and it looks pretty good. These are just some types of forgeries. People can apply for credit cards. They can rent homes. There's all kinds of things that they can do. So what do? Well, we need two things. If a handwriting expert, they need two things. So handwriting analysis is a great way to catch forgery. And what you need is an exemplar. This is a copy of the original handwriting. It's got, when you're writing with a pen, and I know we don't do much handwriting anymore, but when you're writing with a pen or a pencil, and you come up to like the top of an eye and then come back down, there's a natural thing that happens at the top of the eye. And if you look at it under a magnifying glass or a microscope, you can see how you do those. In a handwriting analysis expert, they can go through there and they can look at how you write and say, well, whenever he writes his D's, he does this. Whenever he writes his K's, he does this. And then, so then they look at the question document. That's the other thing you need. And they start looking for those things in there. And if those aren't in there, if the K is shaped like it's supposed to be, but you don't find those certain little telltale markers of how it was written, a good handwriting analysis expert can tell if this is a fake or a forgery. If, for example, assume a bank manager suspects several checks from one person are forged. He asks a handwriting expert to examine the checks. The handwriting expert notes that they're all signed with a ballpoint pen. The expert would ask the person that legitimately owns the bank account to provide several signatures with a ballpoint pen, and then they can compare. It's fairly straightforward, but it's amazing what they can find out just by looking at what you've written under a microscope or a magnifying glass. Okay, one thing that helps out with all this stuff are some national databases. We got the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. They have analytical research services, credit information, business data, financial databases. All of these things are kept in these databases so that if you commit crimes in one place and you go to another place, then it's not like they can't find it just because you didn't do it in the same town. Instead, you look nationwide in a lot of cases. And that really makes a big difference. We talked about that with the tech experts that I visited with last week, who were talking about their databases and how it was very helpful to have access to crime information from other states and sometimes even from other countries, such as you would get from Interpol, that helps you to look for people who are committing similar crimes. One of the biggest places that tend to get to be places where bad things are done are casinos or other types of businesses that launder money. The IRS keeps track of who's laundering money. Let me tell you what laundering money is. You fake or you counterfeit money, and you made $1 million in counterfeit money. You go to a guy and you say, look, can you launder this? And the guy says, well, what he does is he slowly starts spending it here and there. That way nobody notices $1 million worth of $100 bills all of a sudden showing up. He takes it from you and he pays you $500,000. So he's got $1 million of fake money. He gives you $500,000 of real money. You're tickled to death. He's got $1 million that he can spend. He's just got to be careful about it. And there are people who specialize in that. The IRS keeps track of that for nationwide stuff. Interpol keeps track of that for international stuff. And there's lots of things going on with Interpol. It's not just for financial crimes, but that's one thing that we can use. We have the NCIC, which is maintained by the FBI. And that keeps track of all kinds of people who commit these types of crimes and other crimes. So these databases are very useful around the country, around the world. Okay, and I think that's it. Oh, hey, sorry, don't look at that answer. I think that's it. So that's the end of it. Listen, you guys, I've enjoyed sharing this time with you, and if you need me, please contact me, email, voice, text. You guys know how to get a hold of me. You can Zoom with me. And the result is that we're finished. If you can, please study as often as you can and get all your work ready. And that's it. I'm done. Take care. Merry Christmas, by the way.